Good evening, everyone. NBC has been in the forefront when it comes to conducting top quality webinars. We always look for the leaders in particular segment to be invited as a guest so that the information available to the viewers is authoritative and authentic. While all our past 26 webinars are of unique content, a few examples worth mentioning are Mr. Vivek Saravgi, MD of Balrampur Chini, dealing with sugar industry, and Dr. Subbarao, dealing with space and defense sectors. These are the sectors which are in focus now, and people are referring to these videos for their basic idea about these industries. Pharma industry is in focus amongst the investors and analysts now. The pharma stocks have run up a lot in the last 2 months. It's not a simple industry to understand, like sugar or steel or cement, where it's easy to trace the commodity cycle and government policies to understand and invest. Pharma industry is very complex and needs a lot of insight into various segments like API formulations. These will further be divided into domestic and export. Export will further be divided into regulated like Europe, US, etc., and non-regulated like Latin America, Africa, etc. There are further challenges to understand the role of FDA, their warning letters, and how they impact the fortunes of a company. Moreover, the gestation from making a product and getting approval to market are pretty long. To dilate on these in a non-technical manner, we wanted someone with deep knowledge and long experience in the industry or in managing sector-specific funds. Mr. Sailesh was our number one choice, and he was kind enough to do the webinar. Mr. Sailesh Bhan, presently Deputy CIO of Nippon India Mutual Fund, has over 24 years of experience in Indian equity markets, with over 15 years in Reliance Nippon Life Asset Management Limited. Currently, he manages a total funds in excess of 21,000 crores. The funds include the first ever pharma fund created in 2004 with 148 crores, which is now worth 2,998 crores, returning 18.6 times in 16 years with a compounded growth rate of 20%. He has been rated by Morningstar as amongst the top 5 fund managers in 4 out of the last 5 years. We are grateful to Mr. Sailesh for having agreed to this program. To bring out the best in an interview, we need someone equally accomplished and knowledgeable. And Arun Kadiresan, MD of Fitness One, accepted our request without any hesitation. He is the predecessor to Mr. Sailesh in Reliance Mutual Fund as fund manager and was there when the Pharma Fund was created. He has wealth of knowledge in fund management, more particularly in pharma sector. He is currently advisor to some corporates based in Gujarat in fund management. Thank you, Mr. Kadiresan, for having accepted our request to moderate this program. Considering that Mr. Sailesh is Deputy CIO, the employment doesn't allow detailed discussion of individual companies and their prospects or price forecast due to potential conflict of interest. So all are requested not to post queries on individual companies' prospects. Thank you. Now the floor is yours, Mr. Kadiresan.
Right. Welcome, Sailesh, for this discussion on pharma sector. I've known Sailesh for almost 25 years, and I also worked with him in the Reliance Mutual Fund for about 5 years. I have a great admiration for his investment skills, research abilities, and an outstanding communicator. Thank you for being here, Sailesh. And to tell you, majority of the people, participants in this seminar are financial investors and HNIs, and they are directly investors in the mutual funds and stock market directly. So pharma being a very highly technical subject, I want you to make it as lucid as possible. You explain things in simple terms. That's my request. We'll straight away go into the pharma sector. The last 1 year has been an exciting period for the pharma industry itself and pharma sector, especially for the stock market. The Indian pharma sector clearly is one of the Make in India themes. You make pharmaceutical products in India and sold across 100 countries around the world. To understand this sector, what are the different components of the Indian pharma sector? Can you break this up into different segments?
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. I'll take you through the pharma sector in the way we think and approach the sector. If you just look at the sector from a technical point of view, you can classify them into regulated, unregulated, and different segments of the market. But simply put, I think there are two very large opportunities in this space, and that's how we see the sector as. First one is the domestic business opportunity. So that domestically, India has a very large population, which requires medicines to meet their, to service their healthcare requirements. This is similar to a consumer sector, and that is a segment of the market which has been growing 10-15% for the last 10-20 years in India. So the domestic pharma business is one where doctors prescribe medicines, and a lot of patients have access to. And that journey, I think, has been very good over the last 10-15 years and is continuing to be there. The second biggest opportunity is what India really makes for the world. Now, whether you make it for the US, which is a difficult market in one level because of the regulatory constraints, or you sell it in several other countries in the world. So India has actually a manufacturing hub and virtually sells to every single country in this world today. So logically, more than about 150 countries in the world actually source pharmaceuticals from India. Now, if one is to understand, India supplies formulations primarily, and also over the last few years have excelled in bulk drug manufacturing and exports. And these two opportunities, given that the reach is so large and you are supplying globally, the scale of these businesses are bigger than the India business piece. The third way of looking at this sector, or the third part of this, is the pure contract research and manufacturing services, which India does, primarily for large global multinationals. So there are companies in India who supply their bulk drugs and APIs for global large manufacturers and pharmaceutical players. So that is the contract manufacturing related export stuff, where India has managed to excel in terms of cost. So these are the three broad subsegments of the market which are there. In the India space, coming back to again the India part of it, diagnostics and hospitals are other broader healthcare opportunities which are not directly pharma, but they are actually as a part of the whole integrated solution to the patients. I think the diagnostics and hospitals are also very interesting and simple opportunities. One line on diagnostics, because we are looking at that sector today, it's become the most, I would say, the most important sector in the minds of every single individual. I think diagnostics and testing has been growing in India rapidly in the last 10, 15 years. And I think the potential there for growth is for a very long time exists. In fact, given that India is the chronic capital of the world in terms of diseases, you will find that the need for regular testing and diagnostics is there. And a lot of growth is likely to happen in these areas. So these are the broader 3, 4 pockets or 5 pockets how one approaches the pharma and the broader healthcare sector.
Right. Yeah. Great. Let us look at the domestic market. We have 130 crore Indians in a huge market to serve, and it has its own challenges. You have the intellectual property right. Things are improving right now than what it was about 5, 10 years ago, and you have the DPCO, which is the price control on drugs. Is there opportunity for the Indian companies in the Indian domestic market?
I think one of the most underappreciated opportunities out of the Indian pharma sector is actually the domestic market itself. This is one market which has grown double digit for as long as I can remember in India. I don't think any other sector in the last 20 years has grown double digit for most of the 20-year periods. And this is really, in some sense, a market which is likely to expand further and materially larger than what all of us can today picture or fathom. There are several reasons for that. Out of the 130 crore people you mentioned about, India has close to 30 crore people who are the age of 50 years plus. That is exactly 27 crore people over the age of 50. And all of us know the per capita consumption of medicines over the age of 50 years is much, much higher, at least 4 times to 8 times or 10 times higher than the medicines which are consumed on a per capita basis of the younger population. So contrary to the belief that India is a young nation, and which has actually been the theme everywhere, that 50% of the country is below the age of 25 years, there is a large part of the country also over the age of 50 years. And that population is actually where the requirements of healthcare need to really be serviced by all the pharma companies. What is interesting of this segment of the market is that the prices at which pharmaceuticals are sold in India are among the lowest in the world. So it's not a price challenge for this market to grow. The challenge was earlier diagnostics was not there so easily prevalent. Diagnosis was not cheap. Earlier, the distribution was difficult. Penetration of general pharmaceuticals was lesser. But we have seen over the last 10, 15 years, Indian companies have expanded the reach massively in the country. And that has enabled a lot of people to start getting pharmaceutical or medical solutions for themselves whenever they require it. So we think this 50 plus population, which is today 27 crore people in India, India can actually be classified as the second most aged country in the world. So at one level, we are the most youngest country in the world at one level. At one level, we are also the second most country with the largest population of old people over the age of 50. Interestingly, all of us happily look at Germany and say it's an old country. Germany has only 3.7 crore people who are over the age of 50 crore. So you can just sense the opportunity from people over 50 consuming pharmaceutical medicines in India. And interestingly, this number rises every year by close to 90 lakh people. So in every 3 or 4 years, we will add a population equal to that of Germany who are in their 50 plus age groups, which only tells you this is a market which can be much bigger than all of us can today imagine. Second interesting, or I would say not a positive part of the market, but for the industry companies who can really provide solutions to this, is that India is the largest or second largest chronic disease center in the world, whether it's cardiac, whether it's diabetes, whether it's thyroid. So unfortunately, India presents that picture that it is a significantly high chronic rate of diseases versus most other countries. So we are a developing country with developed country disease profiles. And that also means that customers need to be serviced by good companies with right products at right pricing, so that healthcare management is done very well over the years. So I think the domestic opportunity is just begun. Maybe as per capita income continues to rise in India and better diagnosis is available, you could see a double-digit growth opportunity for this maybe for the next 10, 15, 20 years as well.
Great. Yeah, absolutely. I know mind-boggling numbers, 10 times of Germany's size in terms of 50-year plus. That's a huge opportunity, I would say. Do you think the insurance, the medical insurance, which is coming up, and also the government schemes for treating underprivileged people, what is that contributing in terms of the domestic market?
The last available data was roughly about 3 to 4% of the medicines are actually sold via the government programs, which is the Ayushman, which is the Jan Aushadhi program, which is there, where they sell medicines in generic names in India. We think this is a growing business, and I think it is required because in India, still a large number or large segment of the market doesn't have access to low-priced pharmaceutical products, and this is a journey which has started. Government also introduced an insurance program for the bottom 50% of the country. Nearly 50 crore people with a below a particular income threshold are being brought into this new program, which is continuously being expanded over the last couple of years. We think the greater the access to healthcare infrastructure, the greater the awareness to get people to take care of their health. So this journey, I think, will be creating new markets for a lot of businesses, plus also really solving the most critical need. In fact, if one way to put on of all the bigger problems in India, I think the biggest problem is healthcare as an issue, which I think has been brought to limelight now with COVID. Has been greater interest by the government to launch massive insurance programs and all. And I think this journey or these efforts are only allowing people to be well educated about the solutions which are available. In fact, the lack of doctors in many parts of the country, which is still there. So I think a lot of these issues will slowly get addressed as 10, 15, 20,000 crores every year via the insurance mechanisms gets built into creating healthcare infrastructure in India. So I think this is one, I think in a manner, it's a very big tipping point from what can happen to the healthcare growth in India in the next 10, 15 years.
Great. Yeah, that's really fantastic opportunity, I would say. Then looking at the second segment, which is, you also talked about the profitable segment, the regulated markets like the US and Europe. What are the regulatory requirements for the Indian companies to sell in these markets? And why aren't new companies able to tap into these opportunities?
Yeah. First is US is the market of choice for everybody because it's huge. And the size of that market when compared to Indian market is some 30, 40, 50 times, when you compare the broader US market versus the Indian. So it's obviously invites a lot of people or people want to compete in that. But it also has a lot of challenges in the sense, people have to approach it in a manner which the US regulations or US regulatory body, the US FDA wants manufacturing to be done. So a lot of these, it's more in terms of design, it's more in terms of the process you follow, and I would say the consistency of quality which your production processes can actually deliver is what the US regulator looks at. And it appears easy for us, but I think it's a huge task because you manufacture hundreds of different varieties, different SKUs, you manufacture orals, tablets, capsules, you manufacture injectables, you manufacture spatial delivery systems, you manufacture derma products. So each of these requires a significant amount of training in quality processes so that every single vial or tablet which is manufactured has the same quality as the original batch which comes out. I think this is where the biggest challenge is. The size of the market is so huge that you need to supply disproportionately large volumes while remaining compliant to all the processes which I've talked about. So I think a combination of these makes it a pretty challenging market for people to operate. But those who are successful can actually make tons of returns and tons of profits from this market.
Right. Being associated with the stock market, we keep hearing that, there is a 483 for this company and the stock prices keep going down. What does this mean? And, is it a serious problem, or, these are the things which companies have to face it in their progress?
See, it's the stock market and the media which has made a kind of so much noise about 483 that all investors shudder when they hear this word. 483 is a normal audit report for a company. There are always some observations. It is like any audit, a company goes through it. And getting a 483 is a normal course of business. It's like, because they do so much of processes and volumes are manufactured, you definitely have some gaps in processes which keep coming. The only issue is these 483s should not get translated over a 2-year period, 1-year period into a warning letter. That is also still okay, but should not be translated into an import alert where you're not allowed to sell your products to US. In most cases, 95-99% of 483s don't get converted into warning letters or don't get converted into import alerts. In fact, every single plant in the world till now would have had a 483, and they have continued to supply in US, and US consumers have continued to consume those medicines. So this 483 is actually brought a kind of a name that the quality of Indian pharmaceutical manufacturing is poor. No, I think it is a very normal thing. It happens everywhere in the world. It just gets highlighted a lot more because there is a lot of stock market effect to what happens to this in India.
Right. Interesting. Then, let's look at the R&D spending. It is very, very important for the Indian pharmaceutical sector. Are these Indian pharma companies, are they spending enough on R&D? And what is their focus on in terms of R&D?
Indian pharma sector is possibly the only sector out of India which spends some money on R&D. If you look at it, most other sectors are spending less than 1%, 2% of their sales. And one of the big challenges for India has been the huge underinvestment in research and development across all industries. Because Indian companies have access to the lucrative US market, they have built a size and scale of the business which can support these spends. So the larger Indian companies in India spend anywhere between 5% to 12 to 13% of their overall revenues on R&D. And given that a lot of this R&D is needed only for international operations, you actually spend 20% of your revenues on R&D in some cases. Because largely the US markets only require, US and European markets only require R&D spend. And if you just see from a US turnover point of view, a lot of companies are actually investing 20% of their US turnover into product development and R&D expenses. I think today, among the largest companies, if you look at it, the top 5 businesses today invest roughly 1,500 to 2,000 crores annually in R&D, and they write it off in their profit and loss account every year. And in pharma, as you know, there is a gestation period. It takes anywhere between 2 years to 5 years to bring a product to the market, depending on the complexity of the product. These R&D spends are very valuable for the future growth of businesses. So Indian companies are spending a lot of it. Till the last 3 or 4 years, a large amount of this spend was only in filing products for US in the generic market. In the last 3 to 5 years, Indian companies have now started spending a lot of money to bring new chemical entities to the US market. And this segment is called the specialty pharma segment, or the specialty pharma segment in the US, which is very large. And we have seen a few companies trying. It's a very tough business to get into and be successful. But if you get it right, the US market for you becomes multiples in sizes. If the generic market is $70-80 billion in US, this is a $700 billion market in the US. So some companies are attempting. It's early stage, but I think now we are finding nearly 25% of the spending in a few large companies going towards specialty pharmaceuticals. Third area where some companies spend on R&D is also on complex products which are supplied to the generic market in the US, but they are less riskier than investing in specialty pharma. So these are the 3 broad areas where companies are spending money on R&D today.
Right. So looking at this regulated market, there is this para 4 filing, where huge profitability is there for the companies in a short term. What do you think about this? Can you give 1 or 2 examples of people who have got the Para 4 filing and benefited out of that?
I think the Para 4 type of a concept was designed primarily to incentivize incentivize companies to bring the generic product to the market in the US faster. In fact, US companies, branded companies were enjoying very high margins and patent challenges. Even after expiry, there were a lot of gap in terms of generic companies entering into it. So to facilitate and incentivize companies, generic companies, to fight legal challenges and launch products in the US, the Para 4 opportunity actually got created. And that, I think, was the single biggest force for allowing for such huge success of the US generic market over the years. Indian companies over the last several years have done several Para 4 filings and have actually made tons of profits out of this, which have been reinvested for growth. In fact, the profitability when you are able to get a successful Para 4 challenge on your side, plus you launch it, you get an exclusivity period of 6 months if you are the first filer there. And if you are the only guy after the innovator for a 6-month period, which means that itself would become a $500 million, 2,000 crore, 3,000 crore opportunity for Indian companies with 99%, 95% operating profit margins. So that kind of lucrative opportunity was significant in the last few years. In fact, Indian companies really benefited out of it. Most companies have done it. Dr. Reddy's has done it several times. Lupin has done it. Most companies have managed to do it over a period of time, have even benefited by taking profits to the extent of 1,500 crore rupees in a matter of 6 months, which it would have taken in India for them maybe 3 years to earn or 5 years to earn. So I think this has been one single factor which has really incentivized more generic companies fighting for the US market, and over a period of time brought down US costs and increased genericization market share in the US.
Right. So when we look at the next segment in the API market, in some products, the Indian companies manufacture nearly 70 to 80% of the world market. Is there headroom for growth in this segment?
This is one space in which India's cost competitiveness cannot be debated. For example, when you say if you're able to manufacture 60-70% of world volume, it basically means that you're manufacturing, your scale itself gives you the advantage with which you can sell in such markets at prices where nobody can come. Second is, in the API space, every single competency is present locally. Fabrication of equipment, the process technology, the chemists, the scalability factors. And when you have all of them in control in India, and you are able to do it for the scale and size of the world market, you actually end up getting a cost structure which is just not possible. In fact, if you start manufacturing, like you're seeing API manufacturing now being talked about being restarted in the US and all, they can't do it at less than 4 times India's cost. And even if they do it, I think it is just not possible to scale up because those competencies of that scale up are actually missing. If you're finding most other countries in the world cannot do it, it's very difficult for a country who has given up those competencies 20 years back or 30 years back and then come back and do manufacturing. It is like you're saying you'll do all the IT services which you do today from Bangalore and offshoring. You'll suddenly bring 20 lakh, 30 lakh people back into the US and start doing them locally. So I think it's a huge challenge. India was a strong API player even before what's happening in China today. In fact, 20-25 years back, a lot of our Indian companies were actually, each and every single Indian company was an API player, whether it is NATCO at that point of time or any other company from that matter was a strong API player. And all these companies have all the capabilities and the scale to build that. The ability of our company to manufacture at scale, to backward integrate as much as required, I think this kind of an edge does not exist in any part of the world. Even in China, except for a few specific categories where they have done very well in terms of backward integration and this thing, their ability to supply quality API for regulated markets is still not proven to the scale how Indian companies have managed to do it. And especially because we even take care of IP protection, the respect for Indian companies in API space for supplying to US and other markets is very, very high, especially by innovator and large companies. So I think it's a win-win. I think it's an edge India has. Whatever gaps are there today in terms of backward integration, and because we source some of the starting materials from China, I think we have to backward integrate as much as we can so that we provide end market reliability of supplies for API manufacturing.
Right. If I look at a few companies in the API segment, companies like Divi's have built a huge market leadership in the segment. Now, your own mutual fund was one of the early investors in Divi's Laboratories at the time of the IPO, and you benefited from the growth the company provided. In fact, the company came out with an IPO at 170 crore valuation. Today, as it stands, it has a market cap of 83,000 crores, almost 500x from the time of the IPO. After this huge run, do you think there's a market for these companies in the internationally? What is your view on that?
If you recollect, in the stock market over the last, say, leave aside the last 6 months and 1 year, API companies for a 10-15 year period were not appreciated so much, except for one or two leaders. Most other companies were not appreciated so much because the business models were not relevant to be able to fight the cost competitiveness which was there, which was needed to be successful. Some companies have developed very strong processes and significant ability to scale up and have gained confidence of the buyers globally and their ability to keep the supply chain ready. So, it's like in this, it's also very difficult to say you want 500 tons of product in the next 15 days or 1 month. You need a big supply chain at the back end to be able to do it. So few companies have managed that very, very well. And the success of which is visible in their profit growth over a period of even a difficult cycle for API companies, which was there in the past. Also, interestingly, some of these companies, by their cost efforts and all that, even at cost efforts and the kind of volume scale they have managed in the business, their profitability is double of what an average API company actually earns. So it's that the design of the business model matters a lot in terms of how the API businesses can actually build up. Like I mentioned, every single pharma company in India virtually had an API backbone before they moved into formulations for the US and all that. I think the difference between some companies who can be disproportionately successful and some companies who can be moderately successful is the fact that who has the ability to have scaled volumes at right prices. How can somebody can scale up volumes materially at right prices? I think we are able to evaluate that, like somebody can do deeper into a few specific products and get cost leadership there. That I think will be far valuable than spreading across manufacturing a large number of APIs in smaller volumes, because somebody else will come and be much better at cost to you. So I think the possibility of those companies doing well is pretty high, especially with now what's happening in terms of backward integration needs which are there, and the sentiment of buyers wanting products from other nations. Or a lot of multinationals now have this policy of wanting to diversify their sources. And a lot of Indian companies can actually build significant backends and gain in the API opportunity.
Right. Would you compare this to the IT services which lasted between 1990 and almost till very recently? Do you think that kind of an opportunity is there for the pharmaceutical companies and the API manufacturing itself?
It certainly is, because India is clearly the pharmacy to the world. We are regarded as good at manufacturing. So we have an edge in terms of being perceived also as being very good players and very respectable industry globally in terms of the capabilities we have. So hence this opportunity is large and is certainly long lasting, because you generally don't source the API manufacturing, your source of API, when you set up your manufacturing process, you don't keep on changing. So I think Indian companies, as much of effort if they can put in now, because people are looking for new partners, looking for more volumes, I think the size of the opportunity is not a challenge. It is more about how many of the Indian API businesses are able to demonstrate the right cost structure and the deep expertise to scale up volumes. Doing 5 tons or 10 tons of a product will not make them the most efficient player globally. So they have to make it like larger volumes of specific products and build technologies where, costs are very, very efficient. So clearly it's a new tipping point, and China is a big supplier today in several categories, and Indian companies can become the preferred sources in this particular area uh, as we get along. And the next 3 to 5 years seem to be that kind of an opportunity unfolding.
Right. Yeah. You just mentioned about the China part. In the recent times, the trade between China and the US and India, there's a lot of challenges. China is big producer of the chemicals which are which are like the starting material for the pharmaceutical sector itself. They are also there in APIs, in the low-end APIs like penicillin and other low-end APIs. Uh, what do you think? What is the opportunity for the Indian companies, or what are the challenges for the Indian companies?
See, because of the last 10, 15 years of growth in the US formulation side, a lot of Indian companies have had a lesser focus on the API space, especially the larger companies who were more, because there was a lot of value addition happening in formulations and the profitability was very high. I think there
Right.
is, in the last 3 years, so this whole initiative has not been because of the US-China trade war only. If you recollect, prior to that also, because of effluent treatment issues and pollution-related challenges, China had shut down a lot of chemical manufacturing and shifted manufacturing to interiors of its own country. But during that time, there was a lot of disruption of supply. So this fear of dependency on one supplier in the world is clearly now top of the mind for every buyer, whether it is in US, Europe, or even in India. And I think for that very same reason, you need to diversify your sources of manufacturing. I think a lot of Indian companies have taken up that in earnest. The government has also announced a production-linked incentive program to support API manufacturing. Because when you're restarting some pockets of the market or some specific API manufacturing, you require a lot of incentives because you can't scale up in a day. It takes that time, that 3-4 year period to build those capabilities, build that kind of a scale. So I think a lot of effort is happening there, and I'm sure there is an opportunity for companies wanting to scale up. Is it a challenge? I think given that India has already done manufacturing of these APIs in scale over the last several years in different phases. In fact, India was a large API player in 1995 to 2000 and all that. I think the capabilities all exist. It takes, I think it's a 3 to 5 year journey or a 7 year journey where India needs to consciously rebuild the whole backend and the whole supply chain, which I think is a very likely case, given that there is increased trust towards that, both from the government, the policy, and the companies themselves, who want to be less dependent on one variable for success in the business.
Right. Right. Yeah, looking at the other segment, diagnostics and hospitals, you touched upon it. There are very few organized players in this sector. What is the opportunity in this space?
See, this is uh, diagnostics. Let me take this as a first example of what's happening. Earlier, testing itself was a challenge in India. 10 years back, 15 years back. One is the cost of testing was prohibitive, and testing was not considered. It was not a part of routine testing, which people used to do. Generally used to test when you were unwell or a doctor was advising. I think there is a big shift which has happened in the last 5 to 10 years, where people have shifted towards doing, I would say, preventive healthcare, or taking care towards not sickness, but more towards wellness. So a lot of diagnostic testing is now having on a regular basis. Companies do tests for their employees. There is individuals by themselves do a significant amount of wellness testing every year to keep that whether the health parameters under check or not. I think this has become a big wave in the last 10 years or so. And with medical insurance growing, this has also become the first starting point for people being eligible to get insurance. We think all these possibilities have created a market for diagnostic sector players in India. A couple of important points here is the scale. In fact, some players do crores of tests annually. So it's like that kind of a market which is emerging. And these are now become logistic companies themselves, because they move maybe 2 crore samples one way to their central labs. So these are companies who have built significant competitive advantages in this area. And the leaders there have a long way to go. In fact, this is one market I think has grown faster than the pharma market also in the last 15 years in India. And given that this is capital efficient, you don't need to put in so much of capex. People have designed asset-light models which are there. The profitability of these companies and the cash generation ability of these companies is very, very high. I think as given India is a chronic capital of the world and chronic diseases require regular and frequent testing to keep various parameters in the check and adjust the dosages to be given, whether it is diabetes, cardiac, thyroid, or wherever. I think the need for testing in India will go up materially. The pricing of diagnostic testing in India is very, very reasonable thanks to some extraordinary players there who have cut costs and make it very, very, very cheap. So I think the journey here is very long. And imagine 25 crore people, 27 crore people doing testing once in 6 months, right? The kind of volume it generates is phenomenal over a period of time. And so that's a large market. Hospitals, I think this is one sector which COVID brought to limelight. So, you have got private hospitals, you've got government hospitals in the system, right? The challenge was private hospitals have a very high cost of treatment because the land is a big issue. The various other costs, equipment costs and all that are issues there. And the gestation period of these businesses are long. The government hospitals, on the other hand, they have put in a lot of effort to scale it up, but to handle a size of this population and the requirement of the healthcare infrastructure to meet the requirements. Say during COVID times, you could imagine hospitals running full and people unable to find beds and all that. It is just a reflection of the fact that how underprepared India is in terms of their domestic healthcare infrastructure. So I think this is a very important turning point for the hospital sector as well, where people will design the right business models to be able to grow. And the penetration of medical insurance, which has actually been driven more by what's happened in recent times as well, should allow for good amount of investments to happen. Hospitals is very different from diagnostics in the business model because hospitals are more capital intensive. They have a longer gestation period. They are somewhat like a hotel business where you need to put in a lot of capital upfront. But I think with volumes rising and more insurance coming into play, I think the economics of the hospital space will also likely to improve as we get along. So I think both these businesses are very important and integral part of the overall healthcare and the pharma piece which we have talked about. Because more the diagnosis, more the treatment, more the compliance to it. So I think in India also a big issue in pharma is the compliance. If people have a particular problem, they have challenges of compliances which are there, where people don't continue to take treatment for a long period of time. So I think these hospitals and diagnostics are very good opportunities for the overall healthcare system in India for the next few years at least.
Right. Yeah. Added to that, your medical tourism and your telemedicine opportunities. I think these are also emerging, I guess. Okay, in the last 16 years, your pharma fund has achieved 20% compounding. That is 10,000 rupees invested in 2004 is more than 1,80,000 rupees. I've been one of the beneficiaries of investing in your fund. And in the last 1 year, it has returned more than 30%. What is the opportunity for the pharma fund itself or the pharma sector? What do you expect in the next 2-3 years? And I'm not asking you in the short term. I think in the next 2 to 3 years, what do you expect?
See, this sector has now evolved. I personally believe this is the second coming of the sector because some thresholds have been achieved. Some companies have become large enough to be able to reinvest a lot of money for growth. Like, for example, the large Indian companies make about between 3,000 to 5,000 crore operating profit today, right? This is after spending 1,500 to 2,000 crores on R&D. And if you look at the next 3 to 5 years, each of these companies can invest between 5 to 7,000 crore rupees in new areas every year. And, combined maybe 15, 20,000 crores can go into new categories. So I think this is the second coming from the pharma sector, which, as we have seen 10, 15 years back, it was a different kind of a business. They were subscale, small in sizes, but now they are actually reached the critical mass to be able to take on the larger markets of the US, like in specialty. Just to highlight the specialty product market, which is a new innovator space, which some Indian companies are targeting, single products can be $500 million and they can run for 10 years. And most large companies in India and globally today are actually formed by, one or two large such successes which they have managed 20, 30 years back. So Glaxo globally was a success out of ranitidine, which was the Zantac which they made. So that became their first $1 billion product and continued to give them so much cash flows that they could invest and enter into new therapies. So similarly, such an opportunity does exist from a slightly longer term point of view, but in the space, like you mentioned, about a 3 to 5 year period, continuing growth in the domestic market. I've talked to you about how large this population is and the need to meet the requirements of healthcare. Second is healthcare has now been brought on the top of the agenda because of what has happened recently. So you will find even government spending accelerate, insurance, people choosing and taking healthcare insurance is actually moving up anecdotally as we understand and can become a wave in the next few years. Thirdly, you will find that the competitive advantage of supplying globally, like one point which I didn't mention in the earlier part, is that Indian companies sell their own branded products in more than 20 countries in the world today. So these are technically the brands which you get to use in Latin America and other markets and even Asian markets are actually brands which are owned by Indian companies. Russia has a lot of brands which are owned by Indian companies with more than 100, 200, 300 crore turnovers. And even Brazil has a lot of brands. So the Indian companies offer now have a chance of becoming global players in the next few years, which I think is, if there is one industry which is truly global out of India, it is pharma. And I think its second wave is underway, is what my reading is.
Fantastic. I know I can really see the opportunity, and the world is the market here. Now we'll open up the questions from the participants, and I already have a few questions. One of the questions from Mr. Narayanan is, can you explain the CRAMS as a business model, and who are the important players?
Yeah, CRAMS is nothing but a short form for contract research and manufacturing services. Basically, when a product is launched in the US, a new product, a patented product is launched in the US, it needs to go through a lot of testing. It needs to go through a lot of trials, which are phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 trials, and then it hits the market. So there is a 7-8 year period of product. After it is identified, there is a 7-8 year period of taking the product to the market by doing safety studies and all that, which, as you can recall, now in vaccines, we are trying to cut down that period. But in a real product launch in developed countries like US, you have a journey of 7 years where you have to continuously keep manufacturing smaller volumes. You have to do research part of it, and you have to do testing on thousands of individuals before it is brought to the market, before the FDA gives you the. So a lot of Indian companies are supporting this phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and on launch supplies to large multinational companies. The innovators, the largest in the world, most of them source some kind of services from manufacture services or a contract manufacturing for some of their patented products from India. And that, I think, that is the space where margins are very high. The volumes might be low, but the margins and profitability is very high. And generally, it is more a relationship business in the sense, good quality businesses with strong protection to intellectual property can build relationships and work with larger companies for a 5-year, 10-year, 15-year period, and meet the requirements of all these large global players. In fact, the flexibility of outsourcing in research and R&D has brought down cost materially for a lot of large players and their ability to work on more targets and more products. So I think that is a significant opportunity. This opportunity does not go to China or any other market because, one, the intellectual property protection in India, especially in the pharma space, is much better than what China could offer at this point of time. And Indian companies have already built those relationships. And here, pricing is not an issue, cost is not an issue. It's actually the reliability of supply, and in which Indian companies have actually scored very, very well.
Okay, we have another question from Mr. Devrayan. Many of the companies are importing ingredients from China whether Indian companies can go in for backward integration to reduce the China dependence. You address part of it. Yeah, that's one of the questions he has asked.
Yeah. This is it's become the most important issue today because of what's happening. But a lot of Indian companies have been working on this for the last 3 to 4 years, especially when the pollution problem in US led to a pollution problem in China led to a disruption in supply in the chemical sector itself. So you have seen a lot of companies trying to backward integrate as much as they can. See, for backward integration, you need to be a large manufacturer of that particular product. So there is a special scale needed to be able to go back and say, I will fully backward integrate in the chain and get cost benefits and then sell huge volumes globally. So a lot of Indian companies have started to do it. I think it is a journey. It's a chicken and egg kind of a thing where, where you are large volumes in the front end, you will easily backward integrate. But what do you do when you are small players in certain products? So I think wherever we are large capacities and large scale in the final stages of API manufacturing, we think a lot of backward integration effort is already happening as we speak.
Okay. Okay, great. Another question is, can you explain about biological products, insulin, biosimilars, challenges ahead and opportunities for the players in this segment?
Yeah. See, biosimilars, the whatever products we have generally till now been talking about in the generics market are actually small molecule chemical entities. These are the size of the molecules are small. They are less complex to manufacture. Only few of them are very complex, but rest of them can be manufactured by the normal chemistry processes, which all of us have learned over the years. It's just that we can't do it at scale. But I think so. The complexity in there is manufacturing on scale. In the case of biologics, which is the second category of products, these are large molecules where these are molecules have a lot of fermentation-based manufacturing processes. The size of each molecule is larger than the smaller chemical molecules which go into our body very easily. They are generally given by infusion. And over the last 10, 15 years, they have become nearly 25, 30% of the global market, these biologics which are there. And whatever we have been talking about earlier has been generally on the chemical side of it. So the biologic segment of the market is now 25, 30% of the global market. And these are leading to new age diseases being solved by this. A lot of immunotherapy products are biologics. A lot of products and cancer treatment are biologics. So all these products require. So these products are now losing patent protection because their wave started 20 years back. And now all these products are now closer to lose patent protection, which allows generics to come in, like in the chemical products. These generics are called biologics, so the biosimilars. So the generics for biologics are nothing but biosimilars, which some Indian companies in India, like, Biocon is a name who's built capabilities in this area and already selling biologics in the US. Likewise, some companies in India have built capabilities to be able to supply in these markets. Interestingly, even innovator companies who are large companies, the top 20, 30 companies, are also entering the biosimilar space because the market size is very large and they already have the capability and manufacturing processes. And entering into the biosimilar market requires a lot more investment than how the earlier ANDA filings or normal product introductions in the US were happening, because you require, so it can take $5 million of investment for a single product to be launched there. And it takes a lot more timelines, a lot more trials to be done. But I think this is an exciting market. We have lesser number of players today, but everybody is looking at it at the next big wave of investment. And we see a few leaders in this space emerging. In some cases, the cost of manufacturing in India in a few products is already worked out to be very efficient. And I think this is a large market with a lot of Indian companies cannot ignore. And I see this as the next wave where the next 5 to 10 years, you'll see a lot of companies catch these products as their product patent period expires.
Right. Yeah, we have another question from Mr. Narayanan. What are the important points an investor needs to look at before investing in the pharma share?
I think it's clearly which is the business segment these companies are actually trying to address. Let us look at some companies doing only the domestic market. So there are companies who have significant presence in the domestic market, and they are generally like consumer companies. They continue to grow every year at 8 to 10% with 7-8% volume growth, 4-5% price growth. And with efficiency, their earnings start growing at 17, 18%. In fact, so many small businesses in the domestic space have now become very large and generate about 500, 700 crores of operating profit, and have an ability to grow at that rate for a long period of time. They don't need a lot of capital investment. So these business models are similar to any consumer company you come across. And with a large patient population, under penetration, which is more than that of what is seen in consumer products, I think this is an opportunity which is similar to the consumer opportunity. When you look at other companies,
Right.
especially companies trying to sell to regulated markets, you need to look at their ability to create the right product portfolio. Say a company who's spending 1500 to 2000 crore R&D, and what specific 3 or 4 categories it is focusing on. Is it focusing on complex generics where it can have an edge over other people? Is it focusing on biosimilars? Is it focusing on dermatological projects which are a little more difficult to make? So wherever that complexity element of comes into the product portfolio, the ability of those companies to make very good profitability over a period of time exists. So it's about their ability to invest today for growth, and the outlook of the management to put money first on the table and wait for 3 years or 5 years to see returns. So it's unlike a cement business where you set up a plant and you start getting money. I think here you need an upfront investment to be able to gain good profits and growth over a period of time.
Right. We have a question from Mr. Sathapan. How price control is going to affect the industry?
Yeah, see, price control is there, and it is a part of the industry. It's been there for several years. And I think the new pricing policy which has come about, which is, it's already old because they're for quite some time now, but the new pricing policy is not as disruptive as was previously perceived. In fact, inflation-led price increases are allowed in the new pricing policy, which means that companies can pass on inflation-led price increases across even a price-controlled product portfolio. So I think the current policy environment in terms of pricing is very practical, which allows companies to make money as well and allow to reinvest for growth. See, the biggest negative of the older price control, the DPCO, which was there, was the fact that for that very reason, I think we exited the API industry. In a lot of companies exited API manufacturing because even API and their formulations were under price control, and Indian companies were unable to make and supply at those prices, because of whereas cost inflation was not compensated. So in the new policy, the cost inflation is being compensated by the government, which makes it a very sensible and reasonable pricing policy to be there. So I don't think it will come in the way of our growth of this industry. And there are revisions once in 5 years, so it will have some implications for 1 or 2 companies. Also, one important point to note is most companies get less than 3% or 4% of their turnover from one product. So if you have even 5-10% of the products getting impacted by price control changes, it does not distort the profitability of those companies. Earlier, it was a very different case where a few products accounted for a large part of the profits for companies, and when they got impacted by price control orders, you lost a lot of margins and profits. But now companies have become much larger, much diversified, and the risk of pricing disrupting the industry has reduced considerably.
Right, right. Right. We have a question from Nikhil. Non-regulated and non-India market. How do you see a sustainable growth?
Yeah, I think that's exactly similar to the Indian market. You sell at reasonable prices. These are branded markets like India is, and Indian companies have already built all their capabilities in India, right, and have all the global compliances which are needed, right. And secondly, their population sizes. Actually, when I said, like you mentioned, that India is a 130 crore nation. In fact, if you add all the emerging markets and the African markets we sell to, Indian companies are starting to sell or now are selling to over 300 to 400 crore people globally. No other industry out of India has reached that kind of a scale or that kind of a distribution. Indian companies and Indian brands are there in Brazil. Indian brands are there in South Africa. Indian brands are there in all many Latin American markets, Eastern European markets, and all that. And these are very profitable markets. Russia, for example, is an extremely profitable market for Indian companies. These are very profitable markets. All the cost advantages which India offers comes into play here. These are more valuable in my opinion, though they might be smaller in size than what US is, but they are more valuable because they are branded in nature. And these brands generally in pharma never die down. I've never seen a pharma brand die down in the last 25, 30 years in India. So the pharma brands continue to have far more longevity. And it's the same issue. The same demographics are there in the whole African continent as in India. So I think Indian companies today manufacture and sell products to over 150 countries, and with a branded presence in at least 15 to 20 countries, which I think is a truly global capability which Indian companies have acquired.
Right. There's also another follow-up from Nikhil. Recently, Trump has directed production of APIs and products in the US. Also, there's a possibility of imports from Canada. Would this affect Indian companies?
See, in API manufacturing, like I said, if somebody wants to manufacture something at 5 times the cost, right, and put in a subsidy to that extent, you can imagine the impact it can have on the negative side, right? But I don't think, I personally see that as to be competitive globally and to participate in global markets, you have to look at the cheapest source. Whether you like it or not, the whole growth of China was the fact that if you wanted to be globally competitive in every single product, you had to source from China. I think what China became as a manufacturer to the world, India is slowly becoming the API manufacturer to the world. So that's the kind of this thing. Like I said, to set up a plant and bring out production, and it takes about maybe 3 years to get the approval, then to be a part of the DMF filings for global launches. I think it is not an easy case to do it. In fact, I think I don't think manufacturing an API in US will happen to the large extent. Yes, there could be some value addition near the customer, which is the need of the hour, because everybody is looking at some value addition closer and greater control. But I think basic primary API manufacturing, it's not easy to bring it back and completely do it to the extent that it can impact India. The kind of volumes India does, I don't think to recreate that is billions and billions of dollars of investment. And all the capabilities, where are you going to get chemists who want to work in these plants and create the whole backend and technology?
We have a question from Ayush. What is the view on generic price erosion, US generic price erosion?
Last 4 years, leave aside the last 12 months, other than that, the previous 4 years were significantly negative in price erosion. In fact, the price erosion in some cases had gone to as high as 15% a year in some companies, depending on the mix of their portfolio. In the US, there was a consolidation in terms of buyers, where 3 large buyers were accounting for 80 to 90% of all the products in the generic market. And because of that fact, there was significant pricing competition. There were reverse tendering happening, and you had a lot of these larger, and you had significant overcapacity, which was there in the generic manufacturing globally, led to the fact that this price erosion had become very, very significant. In fact, from 2010 to 15, there was tons of money made by a lot of Indian companies in the global, in the US markets, but they started losing that profitability over the last 3 to 4 year period because competitive intensity increased, consolidation of buyers happened. Over the last 12, 18 months, a lot of companies have realized, in fact, over the last 3 years now, a lot of companies have realized and have given up a lot of tail end products. In fact, a lot of US companies and Israeli companies have sold out some of their businesses. They have reduced the number of products they are selling in the US generic market. People are exiting tail end products. Compliance costs have moved up. So new capacities are not coming in to easily go and capture. All this is leading to the fact that the price erosions have now starting to come down, and they are now in the range of single digit 5%, about 3 to 5%, depending on the mix of the portfolio, which is very normal, which can easily be compensated by new product launches and more volume share, which a lot of Indian companies have gained. So in that sense, the worst in terms of pricing is behind for the US generic sector, even before this happened. So it was behind for the last 1.5 years.
Okay. We have a question from Mr. Yegappan. What is the future of standalone retail pharmacies? Given that the chain pharmacies are coming, what will happen to these retail pharmacies?
See, it will take years and years for this chain pharmacies to become larger and gain market share from away. We have seen this happen even in retail as well. The same organized retail versus unorganized retail and local kirana the issues which are there. I think it's a big journey. I don't think there will be consolidation, but I think it is still 10, 15 years away. It's that kind of a long journey. Uh, Retail pharma companies, retail pharmacy chains, individual standalone chains have significant efficiency advantages in the sense, they are not corporatized in nature. Don't have very high-end employee costs. They have the they can actually have, and a lot of people have started giving some basic discounts to retain their customers in the current wave which is happening. But I think the journey for these businesses is very long. I think it is still too early to be worried about chains impacting business. The market, like I said, is just growing. Every year it grows at 10, 11, 12%. And the 10, 11, 12% growth, new patients coming in. All the younger population we talk about today is actually in the next 30 years, the older population of the country, right? I mean, that's the kind of a large market we are talking about. So I think you may have some challenges, but I think this is a journey which is long. So even the existing standalone pharmacies have a long way to go.
We have a question from Mr. Krishnan. Though there is a huge opportunity for generic drug manufacturing, still Indian pharma is riding on the brand marketing. How does this help or bring in change in the coming years?
The branded generic space in India. So different countries have different models. Some companies are completely generic, in the sense they sell it in the basic name of the chemical itself and they don't sell it in a brand name. But most parts of the world have a branded generic play because doctors need to be aware of the product. There should be companies and medical reps who have to update the doctor knowledge on specific new products which keep coming about and all. So I think there is a lot of effort needed, especially in countries like ours, because we have a large patient population, different languages, different levels of education, very diverse income levels. So it requires some kind of a branding to invoke and retain trust and the ability of doctors to prescribe them as well as take it forward. We think both generic as a category and branded as a category will continue to grow in India for the next few years, and maybe 10, 15 years later, you may have a significant overlap coming into these areas. But till that point of time where, in India today, we are not talking about, we think even the penetration of pharmaceuticals in India is actually lower than the penetration of FMCG products in this country. So I think it's a journey, and over a period of time, you'll have both these markets growing. You cannot switch off the branded market immediately, and it's just not possible because of the way the whole system is structured, and it will take decades of. See, there's an incentive for branded companies to really bring products, educate doctors, bring the best treatments available, make it available, and that goes to the patients finally in that particular manner. So I think the advantages of both the models are there, and maybe institutions will go the generic way initially, and individuals will go the branded generic way, is what I think.
Great. Okay, we have one follow-up from Nikhil. Globally, the CRAMS companies have been shifting from small molecules to large molecules. How do you perceive this as a risk to small molecule focused companies?
Yeah. See, this is an interesting question. The capabilities of shifting from small molecule to large molecules it's a huge challenge. It's not an easy job, and you really require to reinvent yourself a bit because the capabilities are different. Obviously, some good companies who have the technological background can do it, but it's not an easy transition for everybody, especially when you want to really be globally cost competitive, and you have to really be a reliable partner to the larger innovators whom you want to supply. So in the case of, at the current situation, like I said, 75% of the world market is still small molecule. So the existing opportunity for Indian companies in small molecule chemistry itself is large, right? And that itself, the volumes there are growing tremendously, not just in US, but in Latin America or African countries and everywhere. It's actually growing everywhere materially. So small molecules themselves is a large opportunity. I think a few players will come to the large molecule manufacturing as well, which is what we are talking about when we discuss the biosimilar opportunity which we talked about. But I think there'll be much lesser number of companies there than they are there in the small molecule manufacturing today.
We have a question from Mr. Ravi Kumar. Despite the government's ruling that the doctors should prevent from prescribing brands of the medicine, but should write only generic names of medicines, if strictly monitored, will this impact big pharma players?
See, certainly this was an attempt and this was an effort done by it was there everywhere, but the practicality of Indian system or any branded generic system anywhere in the world, I think it is very difficult to implement this. Not because the doctor cannot prescribe an unbranded product or write a chemical name, but there is a huge effort. So the incentive to drive business is one part, but also incentive to introduce new products and bring it to the patient population. Please understand, when in Germany, which has become a large part, has become a generic market, there is a huge distribution system where the government manages the healthcare infrastructure significantly. In India, the healthcare infrastructure is actually, or at least the pharmaceutical infrastructure is actually completely in the hands of private sector, who has been able to bring medicines in these kind of volumes to these kind of volumes to across the country. I think the first job would be to be able to provide medicines, even if it is at a slightly higher cost, bring it to patients, bring their treatment plans underway, make them have solutions for their diseases. That should be the first step, in my opinion, in terms of going there. Parallelly, for institutions, you can have the unbranded or the generic model, because their doctors are more aware, institutions are aware, prescribing mechanisms can be very easily monitored, and they'll account for larger volumes. In fact, efforts are happening in this area so that you can actually reduce the overall cost of treatment for the patient. But the most important first point is, can this lead to a lack of awareness in terms of what type of treatments are available, what type of incentive to grow? It's like, I have a simple example for this. When we had a drug price control order in the 1970 order, which was there for 80s and 90s, virtually most companies stopped manufacturing API in India. And they actually gave up that competency and went into formulations and that too for the export markets. In fact, you would recollect there were shortages of a lot of price control products in India. And all this price control only led to this Penji and all these products moving to China. So I think at one level, it appears to be good that you should sell at the lowest cost in the world, right? But at another level, if there is no profitability, there is no incentive to educate, there is no incentive to grow, there is no incentive to bring new products to the market, which also sets back the whole healthcare system in the country. So I think we need a balance of both of us.
Right. We have a follow-up question from Mr. Krishnan. In the recent past, government has brought price control on many of the prescribed drugs and surgical products. However, this is bypass some of the companies. Will this affect the future performance of this sector and the company itself?
In surgical products, I think this is specific to surgical and hospital products, if I get it right. The government had introduced price controls on knee procedures, not procedures, but the equipment which is required in terms of during knee replacement, and a few other areas like stents and all. Some of these initiatives are useful because you were finding surgeries and the overall cost of it going up materially higher, and there were significantly higher profit margins being made in specific products. In fact, there was a study done by the government which brought this out, that the markups of some of these products had moved up from 200 to 300%, depending on the hospital or the infrastructure you're choosing. I think in those cases, this has been relevant. In fact, this has disrupted the hospital industry, and hence the profitability of this industry has been negatively affected for the last 2 years. And so such disruptions can happen. And I think now even the hospital industries redesigned their packages not to be perceived as profiteering, by marking up products there, but more in terms of the service element which is there. So I think you do carry some of these risks, especially in very niche areas where you have got the charges which are very, very high in the case of some hospitals. You may have some challenges there.
Right. Right. We have one question from Mr. Ramakrishna. Do you see any consolidation happening in the industry? If so, likely areas of such thing happening?
I think the consolidation generally has been a little slow in this industry because this is such a profitable industry. Like, for example, the domestic business, the branded business, that is where the reality of consolidation can be, because people can buy brands and then using their expanded field forces, they can actually make them into larger products and be successful. So unfortunately, the design of the industry has been such that except for the last 2 or 3 years where a few acquisitions have happened, like you remember Elder Pharma, which Torrent bought, or one more company which was bought over by Torrent, which is Unichem Laboratories. Most of the other transactions have not yet happened. There are so many mid-sized companies with very good brands, which are, I would say, they are generally under marketed, or the reach is much lower than what their potential can be. So there are a lot of such opportunities which are there. But these companies at their own stage are so profitable that promoters don't want to let go. So smaller companies themselves make 200 crore profit, and there's no need for them to, so they are very happy at the 10-12% growth rate. So this has been a challenge, and hence we have seen very few consolidations. But I think as the compliances get tougher, as growth becomes challenging for smaller marginal players, the ability to invest and expand product portfolios become challenging. I think there can be a large consolidation opportunity in the domestic branded pharma space. Internationally, I don't think, because they are similar companies. So when you have when you have companies in the manufacturing space who just manufacture and supply to the world, I think it's more about capacity. So value-added consolidations can't be very significant there, but value-added consolidations can be significant in the domestic branded space.
Right. We have one question from Mr. Nachiyappan. During late 2016 and early 2007, the market price of most of the shares, probably talking about pharma shares, were at peak. It is down almost from ranging between 50 to 75%. Why there is such huge volatility?
Yeah. This is a very interesting question, because generally pharma is considered a less volatile sector with a lot of secular growth and all that, and stock prices behaved very differently in that period. So just one specific point on this was, this particular sector had a bull market of a sort from 2010 to 2015. If you look at that period, most companies' stock prices would have gone up 25% compounding in that period for a 5-7 year period. So a very sharp growth. And a lot of this growth had come from the US market. And then US market entered a phase of intense competition, the generic price erosion, which we talked about, which created the higher multiples given on those US profits, which are generally of commodity nature. Those profits actually came off, and hence the profitability of a lot of these companies came off. What is interesting is the share of India business in 2015 for a lot of these large companies was also very small, which is more secular, which is more continuous growing opportunity. But over a 3-4 year period, now that has become larger. So you had this blip because of US FDA related issues, US pricing competition being very significant, and issues relating to the fact that the share prices were already high because they were coming out of a very strong bull market.
We'll have one last question. In the last 10 years, there's been a phenomenal growth in third-party manufacturing. Particularly, many marketing companies are mushrooming. Many of these companies are really successful. How this would impact?
Yeah, see, in Indian pharma, for example, primarily, there are a lot of manufacturing infrastructure has been created. In fact, most formulation companies in India are actually outsourcing most of the requirements to Indian manufacturers. So there are a lot of formulation companies in India who do all the tableting and manufacturing. Technically, you can go to them and actually ask them for a portfolio of products so that you can quickly bring to the market by getting the required licenses. So that kind of, there is a very well scaled up system where these contract manufacturers in India, and they are in large scale volumes, they do large volumes, and they are established in terms of, and they follow quality and the processes which are required and which are above Indian standards which are needed for the system. So I think this model of Indian companies, branded companies becoming more marketing oriented companies, and having third party manufacturers to supply products to them, I think is a model which will sustain, except in a few products where those guys, which are very critical in terms of the volumes which Indian marketing companies have. I think in some specific products, people would want to insource. But I think the cost efficiency which you get from outsourcing and the flexibility you get and the competencies you can build on the manufacturing using the same money are huge. And I think that journey of third party manufacturing in a better compliant way will continue.
Great, Sailesh. Thank you for keeping it simple for people to understand. And it's a amazing amazing kind of knowledge and clarity on the industry. I hand it over to Mr. Narayanan for his comments.
Yeah, it was great. And I think people who were lucky to watch this program will feel more comfortable. Probably they would have come out with an idea about what they are going to see in this program. And there are a large number of takeaways that are there. So, if somebody wants to invest in pharma, they just have to watch this video once or twice and they'll know where to put their money in. I don't want to name the companies, but the focus of Sailesh has been on diagnostics and API. So I don't want to be misunderstood, but please make your own judgment calls. These are things where there is going to be tremendous growth. And as the title of this webinar said, the best is yet to come. We haven't seen the peak of the market in terms of share price or growth or profitability of the pharma company. As Sailesh was saying, this is only the second coming. So with all that, I thank both Sailesh and Kadiresan, and for the viewers who have taken their time off to watch this program. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Arun. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you.